annual session starting up as a special session. We're getting into the fall on This Week in Missouri Politics with our guest, the Secretary of State, Jay Ashcroft. Thank you so much for making the time and the hospitality.
Thanks for having me.
So, primary elections wrapped up, certified, everything's in the books. Were you happy with how it turned out? Did you feel like it was a good election, fair election, ran well?
I am. I'm happy that we didn't have real concerns about results. I'm happy that the results came in quickly.
Yep.
I'm happy that once again, I think the people of Missouri have said and shown the rest of the country this is how you can run an election. You have accessibility, you have security, and you have credibility. People can trust the results. That's what you ought to ask for.
You can look anybody in the eye and say you trust every one of those state elections, the right person won. Can you?
I trust that the person that the people voted for won. I might disagree with some of the people they voted for.
There is a new, August 28th means the new law is going into effect. There's a new law about voting. Can you give us the high points?
Going to have a real photo ID requirement unless you want to vote a provisional ballot. Use your government-issued photo ID like driver's license, non-driver's license, your passport, your military ID. But we did make sure that if you don't have one of those, if you don't have any ID whatsoever, as long as you're registered, you can vote. You can still vote a provisional ballot, and then you actually have the ability to verify that it was counted. I've done it myself. I want the people to know that if they're registered, they can vote. We have 2 weeks of no excuse absentee voting in person that people can take advantage of. Hopefully that'll help with some of the lines we've talked about.
This. I heard a lot of Democrats, and I think, at times I felt it was impassioned. Sometimes it gets a little political, but they talk about some folks don't have an ID. In the state of Missouri, if you want an ID, someone will help you get an ID, right?
We will do it.
Yeah.
We will get you an ID for free. We will get you the underlying documents for free. And most importantly, if you don't have that ID, you can still vote and your vote will still count.
But that is something that people would raise. But if you want an ID, you can call this office.
Yes.
And you'll get their ID.
We'll do it free of charge. How long it will take depends on the other state that we have to get information from. We do that maybe 1,000 to 1,600 times a year for people around the state. Every time someone has voted since 2017 and not used their government-issued photo ID, they've either signed the statement or done a provisional ballot. We've sent them information to the effect that, hey, we're happy to get you a free ID. Let us do it for you. Here's how to contact us. So we've been reaching out to do that.
All right, let's. There's something I wasn't even aware of. I heard these stories, but I saw it for myself for the first time in the presidential election. I mean, I'm a simple hillbilly. I'm not really one to sit and cry for St. Louis folks. However, I saw these folks have 2-hour lines. They come up with apps. I think they're doing everything they can do, but if you've got a couple kids and you got to work and you have a 2-hour line to vote, in a way, you kind of are, honestly, disenfranchised.
Well, I think it is a potential concern, or a real concern if that happens. Our office, unfortunately, cannot mandate more polling places. We can't mandate more setups for people being able to vote. We do work with local election authorities to make sure they have the resources. We do push back when they try to consolidate their polling places because we know people want to participate. We hope that the 2 weeks of no excuse in-person absentee voting.
You think that'll catch on and become a bigger deal over time?
I think it will.
Yeah.
That's up to each individual. I can understand people that say, no, I want to wait till the last minute. I think early voting actually kind of puts the thumb down on the scale for incumbents. And you have more knowledge. The challengers generally don't have as much money. They have to wait till the last minute to get their name out and their ideas. So I do like in-person on election day, but I think that'll help with the lines.
So looking forward, if you come right now, you can get your ID. If you come right now, what is it like to get a provisional ballot when you show up to vote and you don't have it? What is that conversation like?
Go to the polling place, say who you are. They're going to look you up. They're going to request your photo ID. You don't have that photo ID, they're going to tell you can vote a provisional ballot. You're going to vote a no ID provisional ballot, the long term for it. It's going to be a blue envelope. The ballot you actually vote will be the same as everybody else's. It'll have all the same races. It'll be laid out the same way. It'll be from the same pile. You'll fill it out, and then you'll put it into a security envelope so that nobody can see who you voted for. We'll then seal that envelope. You'll fill out more information about yourself on that envelope. You'll sign it. There's a pull tab that you tear off that gives you a numeric code that is the same as on that ballot envelope. It gives you information about getting a free ID, gives you a phone number to call to make sure your ballot was counted. you take that with you. You can either come back to the polling place on election day. Most people aren't going to have time for that.
Sure.
If you come back, though, with your photo ID, then you can just go ahead and do a normal ballot. Or if you don't come back with your photo ID, once the polls close, after everybody that was in line at 7 o'clock has voted, that provisional ballot envelope that's been in a secure location gets taken to the election authority. They then pull up your signatures from previous registration and from your voting. They check that signature versus the signature on your provisional ballot envelope. That signature matches, they pull it out, and they run it through the machine.
Been several initiative petitions filed. One gets the attention is the marijuana one, the signature process. Right now, is there a better way, or is this the best way to verify signatures?
I think right now it probably is the best way. We've done a lot on the back end of that. It used to be that there were hundreds of thousands of pages that had to be photocopied and then mailed out in hundreds, if not thousands, of boxes to election authorities across the state. We had to double the number that were sent to Jackson County because everything that went to Jackson County we sent to the Kansas City Board of Elections because of the potential overlap there. In 18, we were able to use a new system where every time those signature sheets come in, we digitize those. So now we have a digital record of them. We now have a computer program that can pull up the MCVR signature and the actual petition signature page for election authorities to use. That saves us a week to a week and a half sending them out. It saves us a week to a week and a half having them sent back to us. It enables us, if anybody wants, to do a sunshine request, and we can digitally send them every one of those signature sheets so they can check our work. I think it's a really good way of doing it. Yeah, I think anything we can do to do a better job for the people. The IP, the initiative petition process, that's a right of the people, and we need to always be trying to make sure we do it better.
How it's done in Missouri, I think most people say it's relatively easy to get something on the statewide ballot. There's been a lot of talk, especially amongst Republicans, about reforming that process. Is it fair that you don't have to go up to Alan Andrews' farm in Worth County? You don't have to go to Hickory Log in Dexter and get a signature. You stand outside Springfield, Columbia, St. Louis, Kansas City, you get your signatures, you're on the ballot. Is there an unfairness to part of the state?
I think there's a great argument that if the Constitution is going to apply to every area of the state, then part of getting something on the ballot to change the Constitution should be requirements that you participate in every area of the state. Having said that, I don't necessarily want to make it harder for people to put things on the ballot because I think it's important for the people to have a voice. What I want to make sure is that if we're amending our Constitution, it's something that a broad swath of Missourians agree on, that it's not just something that we saw in 2018 where 14% of the registered voters voted yes. I think it needs to be something where there's broad agreement. And if you don't have that broad agreement, pass it as a statute to see if it's good or bad, and then put it back to try it in the Constitution when you have broad agreement.
I mean, it's a very diverse state, as you know. Nobody puts more miles in their car visiting the state than you. But it's a little maybe easier, I think, statistically, to go, outside in St. Louis, outside of a Schnucks to get a signature, than it is to stand outside Chubby's in Hayti. That old boy might not be as easy to sign. You might have to make a better case.
Well, and people have different viewpoints. We are a very diverse state, and it would help, I think, to have better initiatives if people had to go to places like that and say, how will this initiative actually affect McDonald County and Clark County and Worth County and Atchison, not just St. Louis County or in St. Louis and Jackson County and the like. I think it would help us to have better laws. We see all the time in Jefferson City where something sounds good in Jefferson City, and then I'm traveling, I'm at my favorite establishment, depending on where I am, and someone says, hey, that doesn't work here because of this. The Corn-Fed Rascal in Alton, great place to learn about what should be done and what shouldn't be done.
Oregon County, folks, the Ledger Woods. Let's take a second. Special session starts this week. They're talking about some ag tax credits. It did seem a little odd that Eco Devo tax credit to build a Starbucks in St. Louis was 6 years, but for a farmer in St. Clair County, it was 2. It looks like they're coming to some agreement on that, but there's a tax cut. You've got a group that wants to cut taxes a conservative amount now, maybe come back next year and look at another tax cut. You got another group that wants to cut lots of taxes now. Some folks speculate here in a few months that might be your job to manage that money. What do you think about it?
I think that we should always be looking at ways to return more money to the people. I mean, one of the biggest things that people are worried about right now is inflation. Where does inflation come from? That comes from the government putting out free money, so you have more money that's chasing a smaller supply of goods. One of the ways to cut that is to reduce government spending. The other way to cut inflation is to increase spending that goes to create goods that are being demanded. And when people have that money that they can invest in businesses and things like that, that also helps to bring down inflation. But yeah, I think we should always be looking to see how we can cut taxes. We just passed what some people would say was one of the largest tax increases in the history of the state with the gas tax. Let's make sure that not only are we cutting taxes, but why don't we vote on whether, let's put a constitutional amendment on the ballot to say that in the future we will never raise taxes without the vote of the people. Not only does that give people, I think, more faithfulness that the government will work well, but it also would require the state to think longer and harder about tax increases and about where they want to spend that money before they go to the people to ask for it. I think that would create better government.
Right now, you follow state government probably closer than most anybody. You have to certify all the documents that come from it. Do you have a number where you think that tax cut should be at?
You know, I think we ought to be aggressive with it. I think that what we've seen, especially with COVID and the past, and with what's happening with the growth of government revenues, we've seen that we can do more with less. We require families to do that. I understand you have to take into account inflation, but the purpose should not be to grow government. The purpose of government should be to create an environment for people to be able to make their own decisions and make their own choices and to be able to be successful. And you do that by decreasing the size and scope of government. And the best way to do that is to take its money away and force it to be smaller.
General election coming up in the fall. Someone you know quite well, Eric Schmidt, on the premier ballot, the U.S. Senate race. Do you feel confident that the election authorities around the state are ready to handle what is usually a much bigger flood of voters?
I do. That's something that is not just a one-day thing. That's something that election authorities started working for that as soon as they got done certifying the August election. I'm confident that the people of the state, if you're registered, you'll be able to vote. Your vote will count, and the aggregate sum of the people's votes will make the decision. That's the way it ought to be. We're supposed to be a government of, by, and for the people.
We hope after those votes are counted, we can come talk about it here on This Week in Missouri Politics.
It won't be too late, I'll tell you that much. We'll get it done in a good time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. We'll be right back with our Opinion Maker panel. The golden voice of Columbia, Branden Rathert, is going to be on. But first, go to showmissouri.com. This is Missouri one county at a time. Check out our show we did down in Texas County. Talked all things Texas County, from Cabul to Licking to even Yukon. Showmissouri.com. This is Missouri one county at a time. We'll be right back after this.
For more than a century, the St. Louis Carpenters Union has shaped our communities. Through trusted alliances, we deliver skilled professional craftspeople, while our business partners provide the kind of quality jobs that keep our economy humming. It's a blueprint that has worked since 1882. Turning Missouri into a right-to-work state stalls progress, wipes out jobs, and kills momentum. Right to work is wrong for everyone. Let's keep Missouri moving forward. Visit carpdc.org to learn more.
All rise for Judge Mike Carter, Sundays on ABC 30, host of the Cowboy and Judge Show. Tune in for community advocate Judge Mike Carter and his celebrity guests as they discuss today's hot topics and big issues here at home in Missouri. Hear about the power of good from community leaders, business owners, students, charities, and tons of familiar faces. Court is in session with Judge Mike Carter on the Cowboy and Judge Show. Available at MikeCarter.com or Sundays on ABC 30.
The Cowboy Judge Show. Giddy up. Giddy up.
Your energy needs are changing. That's why at Ameren, Missouri, we're not waiting on the future. We're building it with the Smart Energy Plan, advancing thousands of projects across the state, helping reduce emissions through cleaner energy sources, boost reliability with self-healing equipment, and better withstand storms with new composite poles. Moving Missouri forward and bringing us all a little closer together. That's energy at work. Ameren, Missouri.
Welcome back to This Week in Missouri Politics. In the Secretary of State's office in Jeff City, Missouri, a functioning Secretary of State's office. You can hear the buzz. We have James Owen for the New Missouri. Welcome back to the show, sir.
Great to be back.
Brianna, Lennon, the clerk of Boone County, the election official, right?
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You must be at home here, correct?
I am.
I thought. Branden Rathert, the golden voice of Mid-Missouri. Wake up, Mid-Missouri, now all over Mid-Missouri, right?
KWOS in Jefferson City and 93.9 The Eagle in Columbia. And I don't know about the golden voice moniker, but the voice maybe.
They can hear. And Brad Pollitt, state legislator from Sedalia. Sir, congratulations to your constituents and on a terrific state fair you wrapped up. It couldn't have been better.
Yeah, it was a great fair. The weather the first couple days was a little warm, but after that it got to be perfect, and we're excited to wait for the numbers to come in.
Let's talk about something that I guess it's questionable how perfect it's going, a special session. It all started with your bill, right?
Yeah,
you had an ag bill that somehow ended up where we are. Tell us how we got here.
Well, I carried the ag bill out of the House, and it passed out of the House, I think, 120 to 30, and we had 6 years of tax credits on that, and we had about 9 different things on the bill, and it went over to the Senate. The Senate put some good stuff on it, but they whittled the tax credits down to 2 years from 6. And in our MASBA tax credits, it just doesn't work with the 2 years very well. And we went ahead and passed the bill out and waited for the governor's lead, and the governor decided to veto that bill. Because we passed, I think, 5 other tax credit bills this year, and all of them were 6 years, except the ag tax credits were 2, and doesn't hardly seem right for the state of Missouri to do that.
So you're back to work in special session starting this week, right?
And next week we're going to be in here in Jeff City, looking forward to seeing what we can do. My main concern are the tax credits for the ag department. The small farmer, the Missouri family farms need those MASBA tax credits, and hopefully we can get those where they need to be. I think the big issue may be on the tax cut, on how big, how small, what we want to cut, where we want to go on that will probably be the big discussion.
James Owen, there is, to me, a little something odd with, you have a 6-year tax credit to put a new Starbucks on Washington Avenue in St. Louis, but then you go down to Wayne County, and a farmer in Wayne County, he gets 2.
I think, when I look at tax credits, because there's like in the energy world that we deal with, that's always a big controversial subject. But I mean, ultimately, you're trying to drive policy. And being someone from rural Missouri, I think trying to make agriculture as successful as it can be, trying to make those rural communities successful, we should be looking at those as a way of driving that policy, being able to put money into those pockets and making sure that we are able to do that. And so seeing that disparity between what we're able to do for those urban developers, for those suburban developers, versus what you can do for rural business owners and leaders there, I think that does show that there's a priority being lost.
Brandon, there's a second part of this. There's a tax cut the governor's come up with. I tell you what, I just don't think there's any old boy in Ashland looked at his paycheck on Friday and says, you know what, I didn't send enough to the government.
I didn't give them enough. And I always find it interesting with tax cuts because philosophically, hey, you pay your fair share, what have you, but why do we give these folks a break and not these folks? But we know the power of the ag industry as far as an economic driver in the state of Missouri, and I get knocked for this sometimes. I'm like, sometimes we do have to, in effect, you're talking almost $100 billion industry, the ag industry in Missouri, and how important that is, and what can we do to help without doing it at the expense of others.
Brandon, this is an interesting time. You have the Senate wants to cut taxes, maybe a little now, maybe a little more later. They have the House that wants to cut a lot of taxes now. Earlier, Jay Ashcroft said he kind of thought the aggressive approach was the move. What do you think?
Hailing from Columbia, college town, with the University of Missouri is a huge economic driver at the University of Missouri. Making sure that we still adequately support our flagship campus and those economic drivers at the same time that we're pulling back our taxes, we still need to have revenue going to those areas. We need to fund our schools. We need to do all of the things that make the rest of our society function. So that's that number that I'm looking for.
You see some W2 Republicans, they'll look at the situation and go, well, the revenues are high. Well, inflation does that. Then it also makes your expenses usually follow that to get pretty high. You think they could go too far?
In which way?
With the tax cut.
With the tax cut, I think those numbers are really what we need to be looking at to drive decisions about what kind of revenue we can afford to lose.
Representative, what do you think? When it comes to the Senate, let's say they pass something. Where do you think that number should be?
Well, I think the governor's saying $700 million. I've looked at those figures, and I agree that we have to make sure 4 or 5 years from now we can still fund the essential functions of our state and of our government. With that being said, I think the governor's looking pretty conservative on revenues and a little liberal on expenditures, making sure we don't overspend on that. And I think the question
That's how
is,
you run a business, right?
well, I would say that every single person in the House and the Senate, hopefully they run their households that way. And at the end of the year, you'd like to have a little left over. If you do it the opposite, then you have nothing left over. And I don't think that we want to do that. I think we just have to look at where it's going to come. Is it going to be corporate? Is it going to be personal property taxes? Which, you know, with the increase in inflation on the cars, they're going to be hit with. I myself, you know, are going to be hit with an increase in personal property taxes on my vehicles, but most of those local entities have already set their tax rate, and so doing personal property tax at this late in the game, they're getting ready to send those tax things out, so that's a little tough.
Prediction time, will you get a tax cut passed in special session?
I believe we're going to get the tax credits to 6 years, and I'm hoping that we can come together on a number that we can all live with to give some money back to the folks that are paying it.
What do they do?
It's interesting chatting with folks within the Republican Party. I don't want to say go against the governor, but they're mindful. Hey, you know, we've got to kind of be in line here. The Governor Parson, obviously, he comes from an agriculture background. I mean, that's his bread and butter. It's to an extent the bread and butter of Missouri. The Republicans, obviously, overwhelming majority in both chambers in Jefferson City, and I think that we get a compromise maybe somewhere between what we want and reality. I always say it's great to have all of these things. I liken this to when I lived in Florida, for example. We didn't have an income tax, and people would say, that's got to be great, no income tax. Well, they get you. You go and license your car. They get you one way or the other. So that's kind of how I look at it here.
Right, you think they get a tax cut done?
I think it depends on how much you read into them pushing off the special session starting.
Good point.
I think there's a few people in the Senate who are not going to be there. They don't have a lot to lose. I think just depending on how they treat this, I think you could see the return of some chaos. Maybe not. I hope in light of the fact that this is good policy or a good tax credit, that sometimes is irrelevant.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it is very personal. There's a personal element to all of it.
Yeah.
So you think no?
I think it's
I'm
too close to call.
I'm going to bet you a Bud Light on that. I think they do.
All right.
Let's talk about the Senate race. Brianna, you actually going to be one of the people that counts these votes. It just feels like there was Trudy Bush's campaign had a really great shot. You saw some things coming together. If it was Greitens, if Danforth had his third person in there, it looks like the hill has got a lot steeper since the primary.
I mean, I think that there was a lot of momentum at the end of the primary race that obviously carried her over the top, and we saw that in Boone County too. And the general election is a totally different animal. We all know that. Primaries, you run a different campaign than you do in the general. So a lot of it will be about money, and a lot of it will be about how much she can personally get out into meeting people. But based on what's been happening in Boone County, I know she's visited several times, so I know that she's traversing the state and introducing herself to people.
James Owen, the Hill, I thought there was a real shot she had to be a United States Senator.
Yeah.
But it kind of depended upon Danforth's guy staying in. Kind of depended upon Eric Greitens being a much better candidate to run against than anybody else. That hill's gotten a lot steeper.
You had to have a lot of things go her way in order for that to be successful, but I think you look at the numbers and you look at how Democratic votes in rural areas have gone from being 40% to 25%. You look at how that has kind of atrophied in suburban areas. Even if you have people who are motivated who have not voted before over Dobbs or over some of these other issues, I still just look at the fact that you've got numbers in the state that even if you saw Democratic-leaning areas come out in force, they're still not going to be able to overcome. I think it's probably too big of a hill for her.
Representative, you know Eric Schmidt very well.
I know him fairly well.
To me, this was going to be one of the most interesting general elections we've had in a long time. Eric Schmidt makes it a little more boring, frankly, because, I mean, he's the clear favorite, right?
Well, I think the last time I looked at the polls, he was 11 or 12% up. And, you know, he's proven that he's willing to come out and fight fight for some of the issues that rural Missouri is concerned about, some of the woke issues coming out of Washington, D.C., and he's shown that he will fight against those in what he did as Attorney General. So I really think he's in a good position.
Brandon, I was looking forward to asking this question. You host a show in a town that is a little bit liberal, but in a county, and now in whole mid-Missouri, that's very conservative. You get a very broad scope of all of it. Is this just too big of a hill for any Democrat, even though good, very good candidate, very nice person? Is the hill too big to climb?
I think so. What I'm always interested, especially now, we talk about the Dobbs decision and kind of the misinformation as to people think, well, I've got to vote this way because of that, and distaste, maybe, for Republicans as a whole because of messaging from Democrats on a national level. So what always interests me are those politically unhoused voters, because right now we have, we know in Missouri, hundreds of thousands, I would guess, regretful Biden voters. And then I would say, too, probably a lot of people, especially on the farther right, that are like, this, what's happening with Trump and with Eric Schmidt, with a lot of the lawsuits that he filed, which I agreed with, by the way. He maybe went a little overboard on some of those.
Well, he didn't leave any in the chamber, right? He had them all filed.
He did. He pulled them all out, and he spun the thing, and he took his chances, and he didn't win every time, but he got some wins. And some people might look at that and go, well, and he's on Fox TV all the time. And so that could, I would think, ultimately, he's got it. But it may be not as close as one might assume for a ruby red state like Missouri.
Well, speaking of ruby red, we're running out of time to this ruby red show. Brad, Pollitt, tell me who won the week.
Well, I believe that the first responders and the citizens that the governor honored today for their life-saving activities, you know, they're honored today, but they represent all the first responders in the state of Missouri, and I believe they won the week, and they normally win every week.
Brandon, who won the week?
I'll go with first responders. I always sport my back the blue bracelet. If I could pick 3 winners of the week really quick, Brianna Lennon for showing up with hair like that on TV. I respect you. I love you. You being you. You as a dude admitting you drink Bud Light. And I hope Budweiser's not a sponsor. And Caleb Rowden for the upcoming roast, for being willing to do a roast.
Yes, it is going to be a good time. Who won the week?
Clark Summers, who is the Cape Girardeau County Clerk. She is the newly installed president of the Missouri Association for County Clerks and Election Authorities. She's going to be the president through the 2022 election. It's going to be a big job, and we're all very excited to be supporting her.
Tanya Defendall, notwithstanding, you're my daughter's favorite county clerk, by the way. It's probably the hair, it's a lot of the TikTok, but
Thanks.
Who won the week?
I think any supporter of sports betting, when you see that go into effect in Kansas and you have Laura Kelly, the governor there, placing the first sports bet, anything that gets people in Missouri going, it's Kansas one-upping them. I think that's probably going to bode well for sports betting in the legislature next year.
Outstanding. I'm going to go with Governor Parson. I watched Governor Parson probably meet with more legislators in a shorter amount of time than any governor I've ever seen. Whether the special session goes well or not, I think he's laid it all out on the line. Stay tuned for the Cowboy and Judge Show here on ABC 30. We'll see you next week on This Week in Missouri Politics.
This Week in Missouri Politics is sponsored by the Missouri Automobile Dealers Association, Ameren, Spire, and Sterling Bank.
Guys, thank you so much for watching the show. I want to tell you about a new thing we're offering. It's the Missouri Times Podcast Network. You'll get this show every week. If you want to listen to it in your car, you don't have time to watch it. You'll get our Show in Missouri podcast, History of Missouri, one county at a time. You'll also get our midweek update. Once a week, I throw up the Facebook Live. We talk politics, usually eat a lunch and discuss politics. You'll get to hear all those things come right to your phone. Subscribe to us on iTunes or Android. Missouri Times Podcast Network. Please join us and subscribe.